Hi, my name's Chuck Black. Welcome to this section on debugging, testing, and logging. As you write your network programmability applications, at some point your application is going to get to be so big and so robust and involve so many pieces that the simple ways of doing debugging and testing in the past are no longer going to be relevant and optimal for debugging and making sure that your application is of the highest quality. This is where formal debugging, unit testing, and logging begins to come in. So let's take a look at this. These are techniques and mechanisms that you will use to ensure that you have the highest quality code. So let's look at debugging. So in the early days of writing applications, your debugging would usually consist of just having a print statement to print out your variables to see what the value is at various points of time. To some degree, that can be useful, but at other times, it becomes cumbersome. And if you put in debugging print statements all the time, then you're constantly putting in print statements and then removing them. There is a better way, and that way is called debugging. And there's multiple ways to use debuggers of various types. But in general, the basic idea is this. With a debugger, you can start your application and you can run through the code one line at a time. Or you can set breakpoints and you can execute your code to a particular breakpoint and then examine the data that is in your application, and you can see if the variables are pointing at the right types of data that you would expect them to. So debugging is extremely useful, and it involves breakpoints, it involves looking at variables, looking at your code, etc. And it's a hugely valuable way to debug and make sure your program is working the way that it should be. Now, debugging is used quite often during the development phase when you are attempting to make your program just run in the first place. Something else that you're going to want to do during this process, if you want to have the highest quality application, is you're going to want to understand and invest in unit testing. What is unit testing? Unit testing is basically creating software that is around your application that you can invoke in order to test all of the different pieces of functionality of your program. So the general idea is if you write a function, you should also write a unit test, at least one unit test that will test the capabilities of that function. In this way, you can be sure that your application and your function is running the way that it should. In fact, just the exercise of writing unit tests will help you to find bugs even before you run the unit test. So this is a very important thing to do. One of the most critical reasons to do this, however, doesn't have anything to do with immediate testing. It has to do with testing over the life of your program. So your program, hopefully, will live for multiple revisions. And as you write new revisions, you will be adding new functionality and adding new code. What you want to do is you want to be sure when you add that new code that you didn't break any old code that you had already written. How can you do that? Well, you could go by hand and type in tests and try to test everything, or you can create what we call regression tests. And this is a test suite that goes back and runs unit tests throughout all of your code to make sure that the stuff that used to work still actually works. So unit testing is good for making sure that your code works the first time, and it's also good for making sure that your code continues to work as you go through revisions and bug fixes, etc., as you go through time. Now, the last thing that you want to be aware of is logging. Remember those old print statements that you did to debug what it was that your code was doing? Well, obviously, when you release your application into the wild, in other words, put it into production, people are going to be running your code and they're not going to want to see the output from hundreds of print statements. And so what you will do instead is you will use logging, and logging will allow you to print certain events at various severity levels. Typically, you will have a severity level called debug, which will be the most prolific and most often logged information. Then you'll have informational log messages that tell you that a particular state has been reached or some variable or something has been set that's important. There will be warning level messages that say, hey, something went wrong, but the program is continuing to run. There will be serious and critical errors These will be events that you definitely want to capture. When your program is out there running and somebody else is running it, logging will be the only way that you will be able to figure out if your program is running the way that you intended it to, and to figure out what the actual problem is if there is a problem. So these are all important things. In this section, we're going to go through a lot of these different capabilities. You'll see here, this is a little arrow that you'll get used to in the debugging world, because this is indicating how you're stepping through your code. Unit testing, you will get used to the idea of actually writing tests that go along with your actual code that you have written. So you'll want to be able to do that. And lastly, logging. You will want to be logging information about significant events so that you're aware of what's going on in your application. So let's take a minute and look at a demo of some of this stuff, and you'll understand a little bit better what we're talking about. Okay, so here we are at a demonstration of debugging, testing, logging, etc. What we're going to look at here is a logging example. And so in this particular directory, you can see that I have CSV devices, which is the actual file that we'll be reading that has a list of devices and their credentials. We have our friends devclass.py and util.py that implement the device object capability and utility functions, and then we have our main application here. So what we will be doing is we'll be reading in information from these devices, and we're going to go out and get interface information as well as routing information. And while we do it, we're going to be writing information to the log file. So if I were to look at first the main.py, let's take a look at what main looks like. So here I see that I am importing logging, because this is the logging library that we will be using for our functionality. Now I'm going to say logging.basic config, so I'm going to set the name of my log file, prne.log. I'm going to specify the format for output, which is going to have both the date and time as well as the message, and I'm going to specify that I want to log messages that are at level informational and above. So anything that is informational and higher, so warning, serious, critical, etc., those will all get logged. So I'm going to read in my information, and I'm going to then log a message, because this is a notable event that I've read the information in. I'll print out the number of devices that I've read from the particular device file name. So this may be an important event. Here is where I'm creating my devices. And if I've created my devices, I'm going to log some information here about the devices that I've created. Then I'm going to log through the devices in my device list, and I will connect to them. You'll notice there's a lot of error checking code going on here, more than we have in other of the labs that we've done. Probably a good idea to have this in your production code, but it gives a good example of specifying here I'm logging an error. If I can't connect to the device, it could be that the device is down, it could be the information is wrong, but I will want to record that here. So here I'm going to go set the terminal length in the CLI. I'm going to get interface information. I'm going to log errors that I see. I'm going to log informational stuff that I see. Same thing is true when I get routes. And then I'm going to specify that I got them or not. So I'm specifying all of these logging messages here in my main routine. If I look at my util routine, within util I'm doing logging as well. So I've imported logging, and I'm using the same logging object that we created earlier to log information here, and I'm helpfully putting the name of the module that we're in and printing out information that may be appropriate when I do writing or reading of device information. And as you might expect, when I go to dev class and look at that, I will be importing logging again, and I will be logging information here. So logging warning messages, logging other stuff as well if I successfully attach. So I have a lot of functionality here. I have get interfaces, I have get routes. We've put in a pretty rich set of things to show different levels of logging that you might want to do. So this is how we have coded in the logging. Let's see what happens when we run this application. We're going to run main.py. I'm connecting to devices and I'm printing out the information. If I scroll back up, you can see there's interface information. There is routing information from all of my different devices. So this is the information that I've retrieved. I just kind of printed it out as I got it. But the important thing here is to look, is there a log file? And indeed, there is a log file called prne.log. So let's see what we put in that log file. So I'm going to say cat prne.log. And here is my log file. So this is the information that I have actually logged. And if we just sort of scan through here, I can see that my util function said that I was reading device info from the file called CSV devices. And here's my main application that said I read in 3 different devices from the file named CSV devices. Here's a logging message from my dev class module, which has my network device objects. It's saying, hey, I created an iOS device, and this is the name, and this is the IP address of the device that I've created. And you can see that I've logged this also in my main application that I've created it. Dev class does the same thing for 10.30.30.2 and for 10.30.30.3. So these have all been successfully created. Now here I'm connecting to devices, so I'm logging in, getting the interface information, and getting the route information for 10.30.30.1, 10.30.30.2, and 10.30.30.3. So here I have logged all of this important information. If this was running in production, I could then go look at somebody's log file, and hopefully if there was a problem, I could diagnose what the error might be. This is how you use logging in order to debug or troubleshoot a problem that may be occurring in the field, or just to check to make sure that everything is working appropriately. So this is a high-level overview of the logging functionality that is a capability provided to you by Python that you will certainly make use of when you're building your network programmability applications. Thank you for listening to this section on logging and debugging and unit testing. Hopefully it's been useful to you in making your network programmability applications the highest level of quality that they can possibly be.